In today's episode, I'm gonna see if I can make a leather corset as my first full leather project. So, stay tuned. Greetings, adventurers, and welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. So I've done little bits and pieces of leather work, but I've never done like a full leather working project from start to finish all by myself. And I'll be honest, I started this one not really intending to be all by myself. A friend of mine is going to Conquest for the first time. And to help her put together a costume, I wanted to make her a leather corset because it looked like a pretty simple leather build, but it really brings a lot to a costume. But due to fluctuations in our schedule, I ended up working on it on the week that Clever was away on vacation. He was too busy snorkeling, so I had to learn how to swim on my own. But one of my favorite motivations for crafting is making things for other people. So I didn't let this stop me, and instead just kind of set out with whatever knowledge I had based on editing together all of our videos. Which is a good basis of knowledge because it means that pretty much everything you see me do on any of our videos is based on the experience of watching our videos. Which means it's pretty much the same level of experience as you. So the first step to any project, and the one that I'm most familiar with, is coming up with a design. To do this, I just asked my friend for some reference images and then stared intently at them until I had a rough concept of what I wanted to do in my head. And then I sketched that out and then transferred that into Adobe Illustrator and printed out this little paper version with the different layers and different colors, just so I could see the design in a physical space and decide if I liked the overall shape or not. Since I don't have access to her in person, I went with a design that has laces on the sides and the back because it means that she has more places to adjust it if the sizing ends up being off. Then I printed out the outline of her measurements and the pattern to scale. I'm finding that as I craft, I really need things in front of me to visualize them well. I don't do well with just kind of being able to adjust things in my head. I tend to need to be able to see it and move it around in my hands and consider it. I ended up using this felt wool to start making tester versions. We have a lot of it. I'm not sure where Clever got it, but it's been really useful for prototyping leather because it's thicker and it doesn't really act like other fabric, and it's a lot easier to deal with than foam. In the end, it was too big, both in its general size and also just vertically. The design I made was a little bit too pointy, so when you wore it, it had more dramatic shapes, which is nice visually, but maybe not the most comfortable thing to wear long term. And any point and such will bend and crease if it's where your body bends and crease and it's pressing into it. So with those adjustments in mind, I kind of played with the templates and the wool and cut bits off and put bits back on until I had general shapes that I liked. I can't just make the front shorter without adjusting the rest of the pieces because they connect to it. They all follow this general curve that is basically the curve of your hip. And if I change that too much, it'll just dig in different places. Once I got to the point that I liked the new shape, I cut fresh pieces out of the wool because my originals were all cut up and stretched and such. I also cut fresh templates out of paper so that I have them for reference. The wool templates I can put together as a final fitting to make sure that I like the way that it all feels. The paper templates are there so I don't lose the work that I've done, and also I can notate where pieces overlap and such. I stuck the whole thing together with fabric tape and decided I liked it enough that I was gonna move on to leather. I wanted to go a little bit lighter on the leather because I'm going more for comfort than for it to seem like armor. For the leather, I went for around 4 to 5 ounces. For these middle pieces, I used leather that leaned a little bit closer to 4 ounces, and then for everything else, I leaned closer to 5. I was hoping that would make the middle pieces a little bit more flexible, but then all of the rest of them, since they're going to be where a lot of strain happens, they're a little bit sturdier. Overall, while cutting things out, I really enjoyed having a knife that has a straight top to it, so I can keep the blade straight, because if you angle your blade at all, it changes the direction that it's cutting and kind of pulls you off of your line. I also found that it was better to lightly cut it first and create the score rather than try to cut it through all at once and then go back in and do multiple passes to cut through, with the original cut helping to guide your knife and keep your cut clean. And whenever it came to curves, I found it better to kind of cut straight across the curve in multiple little bites rather than try to trace around it perfectly with my knife. Taking a bunch of straight cuts to the point where you get a curve is a lot simpler. Once I had all my leather pieces cut out, I did all the normal steps of kind of treating the edges, where I beveled them and then slicked them down so that the edge comes out kind of rounded, which looks nicer and also makes it last longer in the future because the edges aren't catching on things. I also went in with the stitch groover, which basically carves out a little divot at a set distance away from the edge of your leather. I'm not actually doing stitches along the edge of my leather, but I thought it looked nice and was also a good little mental barrier to make sure that I didn't end up with any of my designs too close to the edge. I don't know, having a little bit of a break between the edge and where your tooling and such starts always looks more professional to me. Once I had the groove all in, I made sure that the leather was wet because when you wet leather, it lets you form it and then will stay how it dries. Then I used this edge beveler to make another border further in around the entirety of all of my pieces. While they were still wet, I used my paper templates where I had marked how they lay over each other and marked that on the leather. That way I know where they're gonna overlap each other just by looking at the leather piece. I'll admit there was a little bit of anxiety of putting them together in an awkward way, so I kept adjusting them and then ended up punching some of the holes to make sure that they fell correctly. And I even added the rivets a little bit early to the front piece, before realizing that I really should save any hardware till later. It makes dyeing and painting and working with it more difficult throughout the entire thing. But luckily I didn't do the whole thing, just a couple of rivets. So in a lot of the inspirational ones that my friend sent me, they had gems inlaid in the center of them. So I ordered like a chunk of labradite to put there, but when it showed up, it was thicker than I wanted and also didn't have as much of like the gleam that labradite has. So it didn't really feel worth it to put it onto the corset. But I remembered that we had these glass cabochons left over from earlier projects that if you put designs on the back of them, they kind of make it look like the whole thing is that design. People use them to make like glass eyes all the time. And I figured I could make my own fake gems, which would be a lot lighter and flatter than if I use like a chunky, irregular actual gemstone. Also, a lot cheaper, because I can return that gemstone. I didn't actually get footage of painting it because it was more of an experiment that I didn't know if I was gonna use. Silly, I know, I should record everything. But I painted all these different moon phases using just some metallic paint. I also mixed in some mica powder to give it a little bit of color variation and like sparkle and depth. And then when I was done with everything, I glued the cabochons onto the paper that I had painted, cut around the edges, and then used this like dragonfly glaze paint over the top of it to give it a sheen on the entire thing, in the hopes that that would give it a little bit more depth. I think that they turned out pretty cool. In the end, I only used the full moon as like the center, mostly because I liked the original design and I didn't want to change it too much. Also, it's a lot less work to put on one gem than like 6. So I ended up just cutting a circle of leather and then cutting out a circle that was a little bit smaller than the size of the cabochon from the center of that circle. My plan is to basically glue both of them to the front of the main plate and then stitch that on. If I wet form it a little bit, it will basically form around the gem and hold it into place with the stitching. To transfer my design from kind of a digital format onto the leather, I took those final paper templates and just sketched my design on them. They're pretty simple, so I didn't really need to like print them out or trace the screen or anything. Once all the designs were traced into the leather, I went in with a swivel knife to cut the final designs into place, which basically means that no matter what happens to the leather, if it gets wet or smushed or anything, the designs aren't gonna go away, in the same way that tracing with a stylus would. Once I had cut in all of my designs, I went in with a bevel stamp to bevel the edges and add a lot of depth to them. This basically pushes back the leather along the edges to make it look like the designs are raised. I made sure that the first one that I worked on was one of the back pieces, because it had been a long time since I'd done any sort of leather tooling, and even then I hadn't done very much. So I knew that I wasn't gonna be super great at it in the beginning. So I chose a piece that wouldn't be seen as much. But eventually through all of it, I got more of a handle on it, of just kind of like continuously tapping the piece, rather than hitting it like I'm trying to stamp into the leather, and then just moving the stamp underneath it. Even if you know to do that, it still takes a little bit to get used to the motion. And it definitely took a few pieces before I liked the result I was getting. After I was done hammering in the bevel, I would go in with the bevel and kind of like rub back and forth over it to smooth out any of the kind of marks that the tool makes when I'm hammering it, as I hammer like different strengths, where some parts are deeper so you see the edge of the tool. It gives you kind of a choppy, wavy pattern rather than a smooth divot. But since the leather is wet, and kind of almost gets a little bit clay-y, you can just push down and move it back and forth, and it will smooth out that choppiness, at least to a certain degree. For that border that I made around the edges, I went in with this crescent-shaped stamp because it was the most like moon-y that I could find amongst his stamps, and therefore was the one that fit the design the best. I really should have planned the spacing of it, but I just kind of went by vibes of how far away the stamps were. But if I were to do it again, I would plan it better. Once everything was tooled in, it was time to dye it. Now, in talking to my friend about the final design that she wanted kind of like a hazelnut brown. So almost more of like a pale chocolatey, almost grayish brown, rather than necessarily too red or too yellow or orangey. Now, we didn't really have dye that captured that as much as I'd like, so I decided to play around with mixing different ratios of dyes, using some scrap leather to test out the differences until I found one that I liked. I also made a slightly darker version that I went in on all the different designs and such, trying to give a little bit of like a color gradient or like a vignette to them. Once the dye was dry, I went in with some edge coat, which is a paint that they sell specifically to coat the edges of leather, and just painted it on with a square brush. With the square brush, I can basically just aim at the center of the edge, and it will evenly cover the edge on both sides of the curve because it's a square brush. It was actually really easy to do. It made the piece look so much better. Plus, it protects the edges even more. Once the edge coat was dry, and that was basically the last thing that I had to do to the little circle piece before I could attach it, I put on some contact adhesive to the front plate of the corset, as well as the back of the circle and the back of the gem. Once both sides are tacky, I can press them where I want them to be, and they will like basically become one. The only downside is that once they are together, they are together. You don't really get a lot of moving them around. I made sure that the circle that's holding the gem was already a tiny bit damp, so that when I press it into the contact adhesive around the gem, it kind of stretches and molds and wet forms around the gem and doesn't fight me so much when I try to press it into place. Then I get a really bad shot of putting a layer of Pro Resist on everything. But Pro Resist is basically just a really thin resist layer that prevents things from soaking into the leather beneath. I use it so that I can go in with some dark brown antiquing, and instead of dyeing the piece entirely, it just sinks into the recesses as I rub it across the piece, where it can dry, because the Pro Resist forms a bit of a waterproofing layer. I find that I enjoyed the paste antiquing more so than the gel, but you really do have to like press it into all the crevices to make sure that it gets in. You can't just wipe it on and then wipe it off without making sure that it's doing what it needs to do. But once I am certain that it's been pressed in everywhere, I wipe it off, and I try to wipe it off only going one direction so that I don't accidentally wipe into the crevices again and wipe it out of where I want it to be. Once that was done, I went in with some gold leather paint to paint on all my designs. Now, I did have a little bit of difficulty with the gold paint. Part of it, I think, was the Pro Resist. It forms a layer between the paint and the rest of the leather, which makes that first layer of paint not really want to go on evenly. But eventually, I think it's just that the paint is old. So it goes on kind of grainy and not like a smooth paint like you would want. Overall, it looks good, but there is the part of me that sees a lot of the unevenness in the color. So this is a part that I didn't get on camera because I didn't realize I wasn't recording. I went over all the pieces with Leather Balm with Atom Wax. It's basically a leather conditioner that also adds a bit of waterproofing. Since I used dye that's alcohol-based, it strips a lot of the moisture from the leather, and it will end up being really crackly and stiff if I don't put moisture back in it at some point. And this will also protect my gold paint and everything beneath it and kind of enrich the color overall. But after I was done with that, I went in with like a wool buffer cloth and buffed the entire thing. And I wish that I got footage of it because the difference between before and after of kind of the shine of it is a lot. You can kind of look at my previous footage of it and then look at this of how almost like mirror finish it is. Obviously not mirror like reflecting, but you can see how much light it reflects now, how shiny it is. I tried to buff it first with like a rag or something, but it wasn't quite buffing as easily or evenly as I wanted, so I switched over to the wool buffing cloth. It came with a set of different things that I can basically put like sandpaper and buffing things on a drill, but it worked really well. Since I've put edge coat and now there's like a wax and oil on it, I went in and slicked all the edges again. I figured they would need to be buffed as well, and I found that it made a huge difference. Before, no matter how much I slicked it, it always felt like there was still some fibers that wouldn't lie down, and it wouldn't get completely flat. After the edge coat and then a wax on top of it, it's almost as smooth and mirror finish as the rest of the leather. From here, basically the only thing I have left is hardware. First, I laid down all the pieces along the marks that show me where they overlap and punched holes through both of them. Then I went in with a striker and anvil for some rivets and connected them by hammering the rivets together. After I was done with all of the rivets, I went in with these grommets and did basically the same thing. After I did the first set of grommets, I went to all of the other pieces that would have grommets along the edge and poked an awl through the hole of the grommet so that I would know where to place the grommets on all the other pieces. That way they'd all line up evenly because that is where you're going to be tying things together. After that, I went in and punched all the stitch holes on the ring that's holding the gem in place. I don't want to rely on just contact adhesive, and unlike Clever, I don't mind hand stitching leather. The only reason I use rivets on the rest of it is because I thought it looked better to have those gold bits of hardware, and because I figured it might give it a little bit more flexibility, but I quite enjoy the look of stitches in leather. I don't do anything complicated with the sewing, I just do a running stitch around the whole thing, which basically means I'm going in and out of holes as I go along, and then once I get to the end of it, I go in and out of the opposite hole so it forms a solid line of stitching. To lock the stitches into place, I tie a knot at the end and then go back through that knot and then burn and melt it all together. The last thing I do is I go through the back of all of the pieces with some more leather conditioner to try and soften the leather a bit more and make sure that I haven't like dehydrated it so much that it's gonna get crackly and brittle later. I do it from the back because I've already sealed the front and I don't want to darken the front anymore. Sometimes when you add oils and such to leather, it will darken the color, depending on the oil that you add. A lot of times we use neat's foot oil, which will make your leather super supple and awesome, but it does darken the color significantly. And because I really like the color that came out, I don't want to touch it. Before I give it to her, I'm planning on kind of like rubbing the back with some beeswax to lay down those fibers and make sure that nothing transfers onto clothing, and also to waterproof the back. But for now, that is basically the entirety of this project. Look at how pretty this came out. It's still kind of tied together so it's long, but look at, I feel like I managed to make it look at least semi-professional, which I am very proud of. I've never actually done a full leatherworking project before. I feel like there was always a part of me that wondered if I could because I've seen Clever do it so much that I feel like I know all the steps, but I've never actually used all of them into one full piece. And because apparently I consistently do things on hard mode, I didn't use a pattern, I just kind of drafted it myself and then hoped and prayed that it didn't come out weird. And it didn't, it actually worked. I find that also leather is kind of really forgiving because there is a level of like stretch and wet molding you can do when things don't quite fit the way that you want them to. I don't know, I'm really proud of how this worked out. And nothing in this was particularly difficult. The whole process, once I figured out the pattern and such, only took me around 2 days. And that's not like working straight through 2 days. That's just 2 days of showing up to the office and working on it and kind of exploring different things. It was the first time that I did most of it. I experimented with mixing dyes. I used edge coat, not entirely knowing how I should. I just kind of vibed through most of it while Clever was on vacation. And I'm genuinely super proud of this. It's not made for my size, so it might not look like the shape works super well on me, but having worn it, it does feel like the overall shape of it works. I'll have to see how it fits my friend, but I might want to make it even smaller simply because it has those 3 points of lacing, so you can make it tighter, but once the edges of the leather are touching each other, you can't make it any smaller. So you have a lot of leeway of making it bigger, but you have like a hard stopping point of making it smaller. I think that this can look intimidating, but it is genuinely a really good project for beginners. The shapes as a whole aren't super hard, and because of the lacing, it is super forgiving even if you get the sizing wrong. You'll have to let me know in the comments if you think that it would be okay to put the the general pattern of this on our store. I don't know if it's quality or not. And it's also based on designs that I saw online, but I did genuinely like draft the pattern and work out all the shapes and such myself. I don't know what the etiquette is for like leather craft, like pattern making. I didn't see any actual like patterns being sold that were this design, just some pre-made pieces. I guess I'll just default to what you guys say, because a lot of you are like full-on leather crafters, so you'll know the community and the etiquette better. But I would like to share it with you guys, because it was surprisingly simple, and something like this does change a costume a lot without having to put that much effort into it. But that is one project of many that I have to get finished before Conquest, which is at the end of this month. I've got so much to do. Why do we always save all of the crafting for an event till last minute? I'll never know. So in the meantime, keep leveling up, you. You made it to the end screen. YouTube loves it when you stay all the way to the end. It lets them know that you liked the video and that we did a good job. Another great way to support the channel is to join our Patreon. Our patron members are the ones that really keep this channel going. We've been going through a lot of growth here with the new office, and Patreon has been a serious backbone in making sure that we can afford all of this growth. As always, a massive shout out to our Grandmaster tier patrons, Familiar T and Froggy. If you want to support us via the Patreon, check out the link in the description below. Otherwise, a great way to support us is to continue watching our videos. You can check out either of these links for some other ones to watch. In the meantime though, my tea has gotten cold. I have so many projects to do. I must depart. Cheers.